It started just after sunrise. Not everywhere, of course, but somewhere in the Pacific where morning crept over the horizon like it always does, quietly, softly, without ceremony. Above, the sky was still asleep. Blue hadn't yet pushed through the grey. And in a small corner of the world, a telescope, one that hadn't seen anything unusual for weeks, recorded a deviation so slight, so minor, that its software almost dismissed it. But it didn't. And that's where everything began to unravel. At 06:13 UTC, December 21st, a new data point arrived. Clean, slight, off by less than a breath. And yet, it wasn't where it was supposed to be. 3E Atlas, the third confirmed interstellar object to ever enter our solar system, had shifted. Not by much. Just enough to make every orbital model tick red. Just enough to force recalibration of everything we thought we knew about its outbound path. You have to understand, for the last few weeks 3I Atlas had been stable. No wobble, no flare, no chatter. Just a soft light, gliding along a hyperbolic trajectory that would soon carry it safely away from our system. Safely. That was the word scientists like to use, because when something from beyond the stars enters our neighbourhood, safe is comforting, predictable is a promise. But this morning, the promise broke. The first report came from a mid-tier observatory in northern Japan. They thought it was a measurement error. But 2 hours later, confirmation came from Chile, then again from a private solar tracking array in Tenerife. All showed the same thing. 3I Atlas had changed course. Not much, but enough. It had drifted, ever so slightly, closer to Earth's line of sight, and that's when things got quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes from peace, the kind that comes from delay, from waiting, from analysts double-checking data that didn't make sense. NASA didn't issue a statement. ESA redirected their orbital tracking assets without announcing why, and within minutes, the object that everyone had started to forget about was back in the centre of attention. Because this wasn't a comet fragmenting. This wasn't debris tumbling through space. This was something whole, stable, moving, not randomly, but deliberately. And it wasn't following the model anymore. To understand the weight of this, you need to remember what Atlas is. Interstellar. That's not just a poetic label. It means it came from another star system. It wasn't born from the frozen disk beyond Neptune. It didn't share a solar birthplace with Jupiter or Mars or Earth. It came from somewhere else, a place we can't name, and it was supposed to be leaving. When 3I Atlas rounded the Sun in late October, it behaved mostly as expected. There were anomalies, yes, flashes near perihelion, strange polarization, non-gravitational accelerations that didn't match the usual outgassing models, but eventually, it passed its closest approach and began to drift away. The story was settling. The mystery was calming. We were ready to let it go, until this morning. What makes this deviation different? What makes it unsettling? Isn't the scale. It's the timing. Because objects don't just change course, not when they've already left the Sun behind, not when the gravitational tides have already loosened their hold, not on a quiet morning, not after weeks of silence. This deviation looked clean, not like a burst of gas throwing off the centre of mass, not like a fracture spewing dust, but like a pivot, a slow, almost imperceptible change in direction, exactly when Earth rotated into the line of view. Coincidence? That's the word you'll hear in interviews. An observational artifact. A transient fluctuation. Minor error bands. But the telemetry doesn't lie. The object moved, and no one seems ready to explain how or why. All across the globe, the data stream lit up. Infrared instruments recalibrated. Orbital projections began adjusting mid-simulation. Radio observatories pointed at the sky, searching for signal drift. And somewhere, we can't say exactly where, high-resolution military arrays quietly requested archived footage of the region. Because when something interstellar moves against prediction, you don't just track it, you watch it, you listen to it, you try to understand what it's responding to. Later that morning, a faint signature was detected, not from the object itself, but from the region it had crossed. A polarized reflection, just a flicker, but one that didn't match sunlight scattering off dust. It was sharp, specular, like light bouncing from a surface, not a gas cloud. And here, once again, the story bends. Because now the question isn't just why 3i Atlas shifted, it's how. Was it outgassing? There's no jet signature. Was it an internal explosion? No fragments. Was it gravitational? There's nothing near enough. So what's left? The answer is simple. Too simple. It moved, and we don't know what made it move. Back in the control room of a telescope in New Mexico, someone whispered the same sentence people have been trying to avoid since October. It didn't react. It responded. That word, responded, changes everything. Because reaction is random, natural, but response means awareness. By noon, the deviation had stabilized. 3i Atlas wasn't veering. It wasn't spiraling. It had simply adjusted, and now it was steady again. A new heading, a new alignment, still outbound, still far, still safe, but different. And that difference, that single, quiet shift in direction, is what has everyone watching again. What changed? What caused it? What does it mean? We don't know yet. But we do know that something happened on December 21st. Something that didn't belong to randomness. Something that didn't fit the script. And so we begin again, not with answers, but with a question. What causes an object from another star to change course, just as it leaves our sun behind? Tomorrow we look closer. Because in the silence of motion, sometimes the universe speaks the loudest. From a distance it looked like nothing at all. The stars held their breath. The orbits continued, and in the vacuum between worlds, a single object made a decision no natural thing should ever make. 3i Atlas bent. Not dramatically, not violently, but purposefully. As though the cosmos had whispered something only it could hear. This wasn't the first interstellar object to pass through our system, but it may be the first that didn't simply pass. Astronomers ran the numbers again, then 10 more times, and the plot kept curving, just slightly, away from the outbound projection. The change was subtle, elegant, almost like a hand adjusting a dial. And in that delicate adjustment, everything changed. You'd think a trajectory shift would look chaotic, a plume of debris, a twisting body, light scattering across a fragmenting core. But that's not what happened. The object remained steady, smooth, unbroken. No tail increase, no coma disturbance, no wobble in its light curve. It simply curved. A quiet refusal to follow the line we had drawn for it. This is what rattled the physicists. You can explain erratic behavior, you can model decay, but you can't model precision without intention, and here, intention began to echo louder than theory. To understand how strange this is, you have to look at how we expect things to move in space. A comet vents gas. The surface heats unevenly. Outgassing causes a thrust, pushing the object off course. It spins, it wobbles, it flickers as sunlight catches different sides. That's the language of nature. But 3i Atlas didn't stutter. Its turn came with silence. No flare, no rise in temperature, no change in rotation rate, no deviation in shape. Just a clean curve, like a ship adjusting its rudder mid-ocean. The more they looked at the data, the more it resembled control. We've seen comets break apart before. We've watched asteroids drift from impact. We know the physics of chaos. But this was not chaos. The brightness remained constant. The polarization didn't shift. Even the surrounding dust halo, faint as it was, and stayed symmetrical. It was as though the entire object moved together, as one. The phrase rigid body motion began appearing in analysis reports, which means one thing: the nucleus, whatever it is, held. And that implies something even stranger. It wasn't a loose collection of rock and ice, it was solid. Some telescopes, using long exposure tracking, reported a pattern in the object's wake. Not a trail, not a tail, a wave, a rhythmic disturbance in the dust nearby. As if the very space around it pulsed, gently, like a soft push repeated over hours. Could it be the result of venting? Could light pressure alone cause this? Every model said no, but the wave was there, not perfectly sinusoidal, not bright, but undeniable, and it seemed to follow the object, not trail it. It looked less like residue, and more like a signature. Meanwhile, the solar observatories had their own concerns. The Parker Solar Probe, now well beyond Atlas's path, recorded a magnetic ripple days prior. Small, delayed, but persistent. a whisper of distortion as if something passed through a current and left it trembling, and when scientists overlaid the new Atlas trajectory with solar flare data from October, they aligned. The deviation followed the path of least resistance, not through space, but through magnetism. That night at an observatory in the Canary Islands, a radio technician picked up something odd. Not a signal, not a transmission, just silence. A shadow in the frequency band where there should have been background noise. It wasn't a gap, more like an absence. A notch in the natural hum of space. That absence passed just once, and then it was gone. But the timestamp matched the moment Atlas turned, like a mute button pressed for only a second. It could be coincidence, but the data doesn't believe in coincidence anymore. For decades, we've imagined the signs of technology would come in the form of light, heat, or noise. But what if it's the absence that tells the truth? What if silence is the signature? This deviation may not have been an act of defiance. It may have been a gesture, not toward us, but toward the sun. Because the new path Atlas follows bends not toward Earth, but toward the magnetic footprint of the solar flare it survived. It's as if it's chasing something, or being called. And that brings us to the next mystery. Not the object's motion, but the world's reaction to it. You'd expect a press release, maybe a short blog post, something, even a denial. But instead, there was nothing. No update from NASA, no briefing from ESA, no bulletin from the International Astronomical Union. And in that silence, people started asking questions, because the moment Atlas changed direction, every telescope that mattered stopped sharing public data. Not all at once, but fast enough to feel like a decision. There's a kind of stillness that only happens when something important is unfolding. Not chaos, but focus. The hush that comes just before a line of code is executed, or a final switch is flipped. Atlas was never classified. It was, after all, a comet, a curiosity, a visitor. But the moment it stopped behaving like one, it became something else. And that something no longer belonged to open science. Independent astronomers were the first to notice. A handful of backyard observatories that still track the object daily began sharing anomalies, reflections where there should be none, light curves that refuse to fade. A pale, subtle shimmer in the infrared, like heat held back. They posted the frames, then they disappeared. Not literally, just the posts, taken down, flagged for processing errors, or instrument artifacts. One forum locked an entire thread, a moderator citing sensitive content, but the images weren't fake. They were too detailed, too consistent, and they all showed the same thing. Atlas had not only shifted, it was stable in the new trajectory, and that's what frightened people most, because unpredictable is one thing, unstable is another, but stable, after changing course, that implies conclusion, decision, and most of all, purpose. Not aimless wandering, not debris drifting in the void, but a path, and paths are made by those who know where they're going. By midday, encrypted observatory channels went dark, not shut down, just silent. The public feeds kept broadcasting routine sky maps, but 3 Atlas was no longer on them, as if, in one quiet sweep, it had been erased. Not from the sky, but from the record. And yet, it's still there, still glowing, still moving, still bending away from the trajectory we thought it would follow. And though no one's speaking officially, the algorithms haven't caught up. The models still try to snap it back onto its original line. But the gravity doesn't pull like it used to, as if it's being held by something else. A silence that isn't empty, a motion that isn't random, an object that shouldn't respond, but has. And this, perhaps, is the most unnerving part. 3i Atlas is still leaving, just not the way we thought, and somewhere between that curve and that silence something changed. In the next chapter, we follow that change, and ask what happens when the object no longer avoids us, but begins to align. It was barely measurable, a fraction of a degree, a microscopic drift in direction. But in space, where paths are eternal and gravity rarely gives second chances, that fraction was everything. After the shift on December 21st, orbital predictions adjusted quietly, not by much, just enough to raise a few eyebrows. The new trajectory placed 3i Atlas on a line that, if continued, would intersect with Earth's observational axis. Not a collision, nothing that dramatic, but an alignment. And in astronomy, alignment is more interesting than impact, because collisions are accidents, but alignment suggests intention. Think of it like this. For months, 3i Atlas had followed a well-understood path, inbound from the void, slingshotting around the sun and outbound into deeper darkness. We had seen it before, we had calculated the arc, we had predicted the escape, but now the arc had bent, not wildly but meaningfully, and its new outbound leg placed it directly in Earth's sky-facing corridor. That alone wouldn't be strange, but the timing was, because the realignment happened just as Earth rotated into view, as if 3i Atlas had waited, then pivoted, as if something about our planet, our position, our motion had been noticed. The new line didn't bring it closer, it didn't threaten satellites, it didn't require evacuation protocols or deflection missions. It did something far more disquieting. It watched. At least that's what the data felt like. In the hours after the shift, telescopes around the world noticed a change in reflectivity. The object began returning more light toward Earth. Not brighter, just clearer. Like it had adjusted its surface or its rotation to make sure we could see it, to make sure we were aware. At first, scientists called it an observational fluke, just an effect of phase angle, a coincidence of geometry, but it persisted. Even as the object drifted further from the sun, its visibility to Earth improved, and that's not normal. Natural comets dim with distance, their tails shrink, their comas fade. But 3i Atlas did the opposite. Its brightness profile shifted subtly toward coherence. Its reflected light stopped scattering like dust. It began to resemble a body, smooth, perhaps flat, not tumbling, not spinning, just oriented, and the orientation always faced Earth. When light behaves this way, it means something is responding to geometry, and in astrophysics, geometry is everything. The light curve of 3i Atlas began to look like a mirror, not a chaotic comet. Its phase angle behaved like a specular surface, not a cloud of particles. Each rotation, each tilt brought more of it into view, not for the sun, not for the stars, but for us. At a research facility in Western Australia, a team compared its reflectivity curve to known materials. The match wasn't exact, but it suggested something smooth, possibly metallic, possibly layered. Nothing confirmed, nothing solid. But the light was too consistent to be random. Natural comets glitter, they twinkle as they tumble, they hide, then reappear. 3i Atlas simply stayed visible, like a coin held steady between two fingers, and it remained that way, all through the 21st, even as it passed into Earth's night sky. By early evening, the object was positioned almost perfectly in line with Earth's upper atmospheric radar belt, and for the first time since its discovery, something odd happened to the skywatching arrays. Not a signal, not a transmission, just a doubling. One station in Norway reported a reflection delay, a duplicated echo from a pulse that had only been sent once. It wasn't clear, it wasn't strong, but it was precise. The delay matched the outbound leg of Atlas's new path, as if the object had caught a radar pulse and returned it. Not scattered, not absorbed, returned. And that changes the nature of the story, because now Atlas is no longer just moving in a new direction, it is responding to ours. Trajectory is not just motion, it's narrative. It tells a story of where something began and where it wants to go. And now 3i Atlas has woven Earth into that story, not dangerously, not destructively, but deliberately. The geometry has changed, the alignment is exact, and all that remains is to ask, what happens when something from beyond the stars begins to notice us? That question echoes into the next anomaly, a strange one. Not about motion, not about light, but about dust, or rather, the absence of it. Comets are messy. They shed, they scatter, they crumble. Their most defining trait is their dust, that cloud of fine particles that trails behind them like a ghost, lit up by the sun. But as 3i Atlas continued its slow drift past Earth's observational corridor, scientists noticed something peculiar. The dust was gone, not reduced, not faint, just absent. Using long-range dust analysis arrays, instruments designed to read the size, shape, and distribution of particles trailing from comets, researchers expected a debris field, especially after perihelion. That's when the shedding usually peaks, but there was nothing. No plume, no stream, no trail. Atlas glided silently, without fallout. And that's when the models began to break again, because without dust, a comet shouldn't be visible. Dust scatters light. It's the reason we see comets glowing across the sky. The gas evaporates, the particles scatter, the sun reflects off them. But Atlas was still glowing, still reflecting, still visible. And yet, nothing trailed behind. This absence posed a new problem, not because of what it meant physically, but because of what it meant logically. Because if something is bright, but not shedding, then the brightness isn't from reflection, it's from structure. That was the word researchers began using carefully in internal memos. Structure. It implies cohesion, intent, engineering. One observatory in northern Chile performed a spectrographic sweep at twilight. They weren't looking for light, they were looking for scatter. Dust particles create a signature, tiny variances in starlight as it passes through or reflects off the trail, but the scan came back clean. No interference, no dust bloom, no particulate signature, only the object itself, isolated, pure, and still. The absence of dust isn't just unusual, it's unnatural, because even interstellar objects long frozen in the void still carry debris. They pick up matter, they flake apart near stars. But Atlas held, like it was designed not to fragment, like it chose not to shed. Some researchers proposed a protective crust, an outer shell hardened by cosmic rays, a layer formed over millennia that sealed the volatile materials beneath. But even that wouldn't explain the clean light curve, or the reflective shimmer, or the apparent flatness in its brightness pattern, because crusts crack, shells flake, surfaces erode. But 3i Atlas remained pristine, like a surface that wasn't fighting to survive, but rather performing. That word appeared in a private research paper on December 22nd. The object does not emit dust, it performs reflectivity. A strange phrase, but strangely accurate, because now the discussion is no longer about what Atlas is shedding, but why it doesn't need to shed at all, and so the story deepens. An object that moves without fragmentation, an object that reflects without scattering, an object that watches without blinking, a body that behaves like a system, not a remnant, not a relic, but something designed to last, to glide, to shift, to turn toward what it notices, even if it never tells us why. We've watched it cross the sky like a thought passing through a mind we do not understand, not fast, not loud, not explosive, but steady, purposeful. From the day it was spotted, 3i Atlas has refused to behave, refused to decay, refused to fragment, refused most of all to be predictable. And now, after all the shifts, after the curves in its path and the vanishing of dust that should be there, it simply continues, unmoved by us, yet somehow, always within sight. It passed Earth's corridor last night, not close, not threatening, just aligned. Its brightness didn't fade, its structure didn't waver, and perhaps most unnervingly, its rotation never began. You see, all natural bodies spin. That's just what motion does to mass in space. But this one doesn't. It glides, it tilts at times, but never tumbles, like it doesn't need to, like it already knows where it's going. The final light curve shows a body that is neither comet nor asteroid, not because of what it is, but because of what it isn't. It's not reactive, it's not volatile, and it's not dying. It's simply present, still moving, still watching, still leaving, but slowly now, as if lingering for just a moment longer, just long enough to be understood, or just long enough to make sure it was seen. We've thrown every model at it, every filter, every equation, every explanation born in human hands, and none of it quite fits. It behaves like a mirror, but one that chooses when to reflect. It moves like a sail, but only when light strikes from the right angle, and it shifts course. But not because of physics, because of timing. As of this morning, December the 22nd, 2025, 3i Atlas continues to move outward, The solar wind presses softly at its back, but the object offers no resistance, no flare, no plume, no sound, just a line, drawn through the stars, extending towards silence. And in that silence we are left with one question. Not what is it? We've asked that enough. But what is it waiting for? The story of 3i Atlas doesn't end here. Not really. It will continue. Beyond Earth, beyond our sun, beyond what we can see. But for now, we have seen enough to know one truth. Stillness can be deliberate. Absence can be design. And silence can mean presence. Thank you for watching. If you stayed with us across all 22 chapters, you've witnessed more than a comet. You've followed the shape of something ancient, something unknown, and perhaps something built. If you found this journey thought-provoking, help us reach more curious minds. Subscribe, share, leave a comment with your thoughts, and most of all, stay watching. Because the sky is speaking. And sometimes, the things that say the least are the ones that mean the most.